The BYU men's basketball program takes on West Virginia tomorrow, and it's come down to this for Kevin Young and company. It's put up or shut up time.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, 14-year credentialed media member at BYU, your resident expert and insiders, your host here on the show. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And thank you for making all of us folks over at Locked On, the #1 sports podcast network. Coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about BYU and West Virginia, a showdown that I believe kind of lays out what the remainder of BYU's basketball season will look like, at least from my vantage point. Then we'll talk about the latest with Parker Kingston, because some pretty new information, at least some clarification, I should say, on when people knew and what people knew about his status from BYU side of things. We'll get into that. Some pretty A-plus reporting from the Salt Lake Tribune we'll get into. And we'll finish up today's show talking about BYU spring camp, because later this afternoon, I, along with my media cohorts, will be out there observing BYU's first of 15 spring practices. We'll get to all that ahead on today's show. And it's all brought to you by our friends over at 5 Hour Energy. You can have your cake and drink it too now. Birthday cake flavor is back. No fork needed. Vanilla-y, cakey flavor, caffeinated kick, and no sugar. It's party time. Order now at 5hourenergy.com or get it on Amazon. All right, so BYU and West Virginia square off tomorrow afternoon, a 3:30 showdown on Big Fox. So it's primetime window, an opportunity for BYU to bounce back from a really, really rough loss earlier this week against UCF. And as I said in the open of today's show, it's now put up or shut up time for the BYU Cougars. And I don't say that lightly, but the reason I say it is because we just saw BYU in the span of about 4 days go from winning maybe the biggest game of the year to suffering maybe their most horrific loss of the year. And the concerning part is they played, like I said, one of their finest games to date, followed immediately by maybe their worst game to date. This game against West Virginia is a game that, in theory, BYU should be able to pick off. Now, West Virginia is 16-12. They're 7-8 overall in conference. Conversely, BYU themselves 20-8, 8-7. So if West Virginia takes down BYU on their home court in the WVU Coliseum, both of these teams are going to be knotted at 500 in Big 12 play. And that's not a place BYU, I think, ever expected to be. But quite honestly, it's kind of where they've earned at this juncture. This BYU team, unless, and I don't take any revelry in saying this, unless they find a way to be able to defend effectively in some way, shape, or form, I don't think the rest of the season is going to go to the way the BYU wants it to go, because if they cannot defend, especially on the perimeter, BYU is going to find themselves in really, really tough scenarios to win basketball games. And that starts tomorrow with West Virginia. Coming up, I think, is it Tuesday against Cincinnati? And then obviously the home finale, the regular season finale against Texas Tech a week from tomorrow. You head into the Big 12 tournament. Obviously, BYU should be on the right side of the NCAA tournament just by the body of work they've put together already at this point. But are any of us, yours truly included, really counting on BYU making a run at this point? It feels like, and like I said, unless BYU finds a magic elixir that suddenly sees them defending with their lives seemingly on the court, do we expect BYU to win maybe more than one game come March Madness, and very easily could be one of those trendy upset picks to be taken down in round 1 of March Madness? And that's not, like I said, not fun stuff to consider, but that's kind of where we're at with this BYU basketball team. And I know that's kind of crazy to say, but think about it. Like I said, the win of the season, the signature win that really kind of completed BYU's NCAA tournament resume against Iowa State. They played good, effective defense. They played as a team, seemingly got contributions from across the roster in the immediate aftermath of losing Richie Saunders for the season. And then he followed up a game later with one of the worst defensive performances at minimum I've seen in quite some time from a BYU basketball squad, trailed by as many as 36 points. I know they made it 13 points in the end, but that was putting lipstick on a pig against UCF. So that's where we're left. And yes, there is some positive news on the recruiting front. If you've been paying attention, 24/7 Sports has now got what they call their prediction analytic or whatever they call it. I'm butchering it right now, but they're predicting that Bruce Branch, the third, who is the 6th rated player in this upcoming recruiting class, he's slated, at least in their eyes, to go to BYU. And I can tell you that if you've been a member of our Insiders group or Everydayers Club, depending on which time you joined, I've been saying this quite some time that BYU's been the leader in the clubhouse for him. So at BYU, it's kind of a juxtaposition of two things here. They're recruiting juggernaut on one side over here, but the actual product on the court right now doesn't really match up with that. And it's kind of crazy to consider, but the situation is BYU understands what they're up against here. They know that they have a depleted roster. They know that they have got a bunch of guys they would rather have healthy that are unavailable to them. But the guys that go out there, AJ Dybantsa, Rob Wright III, who kind of lead the way, but you include Moo Davis, you include Dominic Diomande, Khadim Mboup, just going on the list of the roster, Keba Keita, they have to essentially step up and say, okay, enough's enough. We are going to figure this thing out. And it's not too late for BYU to get some consistency back, but time is getting really, really short. And if they're going to put the same lackluster effort out on the court that they did against UCF, yeah, I don't see why anybody would be buying into anything BYU's trying to sell right now. I'm speaking of just their chances this season. Obviously, Bruce Branch is intrigued enough by BYU's development of guys like AJ Dybantsa and Jaeger Dielman, and he's thinking, okay, I'm going to go be the next kind of freshman starlet for BYU next season. But at the same time, we've got a current season ongoing right now that was rife with all kinds of expectations. And it doesn't seem like one of them is going to really be accomplished. And some of it's been bad luck because they've obviously been hit with the injury bug. But the other side of it is there's just effort lacking from this BYU basketball team. So we'll see how it all goes. And I'm genuinely curious to see what type of mindset BYU attacks West Virginia with, because it's not saying that BYU can't win. The predictive analytics actually favor BYU in many regards. Ken Palm, you go to BPI with ESPN, on down the list. BYU is the favorite in this game, as they should be. But they were a heavy favorite. I think it got to as many as 14 points or at one point, but according to our friends over at FanDuel, ahead of the tip-off against UCF, but you ended up trailing by 36 in that one. So the Cougars, they've got a lot to live up to and a lot to show, I think, everybody within the sound of my voice and the rest of Cougar Nation, because I think all of us want to see them put a more effective product on the court, and it starts tomorrow in Morgantown, West Virginia, a place that, crazily enough, remember, just a season ago, that game at West Virginia was the kind of the turnaround mark for BYU, and they went on an incredible run the rest of the way. Now, obviously, that happened a little earlier in the season because they put together a 9-game win streak in the end after that game against West Virginia a season ago. You've got 2 games after this heading into Big 12 tournament play. Can this get you a little bit of a spark? One could hope, but at the same time, if you're basing it on the effort level BYU put out against UCF, I also understand why you'd be like, I'm out. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about the latest with Parker Kingston, obviously facing felony rape charges, but there's been a big debate online among different fan bases, most notably one that, supports the Utah Utes, who want to claim that BYU, at least they believe when they know that BYU knew about Parker Kingston. Well, the Salt Lake Tribune, I think, has laid out exactly what happened, when people knew about it, and why exactly it took so long for this to come to light. We'll get into all that next. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at man, it's like bugging out on me here on my end, but it's brought to you today by our friends over at 5 Hour Energy. Welcome to the 5 Hour Energy flavor draft with 18 different flavors to choose from, including new options like confetti craze, fruity rainbow, or cotton candy. There is something for everyone, and more importantly, I think all of us out there are looking at what the options are when it comes to what you're trying to get. The board is set, the flavors are ready, and I've got my number one pick for the 5 Hour Energy flavor draft. And I'm not going to lie, I'm switching it up. I am going to go with sour apple. I am a huge fan of like sour things, and the sour apple, it's an apple that bites back, a crisp, tangy taste. But even if you're not that, they've got all the options for you guys: cherry, fruity rainbow, like I said, cotton candy, berry flavors, tropical burst. it seems like they've got an opportunity for every single one of you out there to find an option that you like from our friends at 5 Hour Energy. All you got to do now is go to 5hourenergy.com to find your new favorite flavor of their 5 Hour Energy shots. Once again, at 5hourenergy.com, or order them today on Amazon. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. The biggest stretch of the college basketball season is almost here. It's March Madness, buzzer beaters, bracket busters, and those unforgettable moments that everybody's talking about the next day. And being there live for an event like that, well, there's nothing like that. It's bucket list stuff. And the hard part is always actually getting those tickets. Long queues, prices jumping around, and surprise fees at checkout. That's where the Game Time app comes in. It gives fans the advantage back with constant innovation. It's how you unlock amazing tickets and experiences in just a few taps. Incredibly simple to use. The Game Time guarantee means that 100% legitimate tickets delivered on time at the best price for you as the consumer. And here's the best part. Fees are included in the price you see right up front. What you see is what you pay. Period. End of story. I love being able to follow the teams in the app and get alerts when new deals drop, in terms of like, hey, you're tracking a team and you want to go watch them. Well, all of a sudden it hits a certain threshold, you can jump right in and get your tickets. No stress, no guesswork, just a smooth experience from start to finish. That's exactly what you want during the busiest part of the season. Take the guesswork out of buying your college basketball tickets and do it with our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Create an account. Use the promo code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Reading the promo code LOCKEDON. That's Locked On for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars a part of your day out there. If you are a true everydayer and want to support this podcast in a bigger way than you already do, and I appreciate all the support you guys give us, let me be very blunt up front, but if you want to join the Locked On Cougars Everydayer Club, ad-free audio episodes, access to Locked On merch, our members-only Discord access server with a specific channel for BYU fans, etc., go to lockedoncougars.supercast.com. There is a link in the show notes below as well. But once again, that's lockedoncougars.supercast.com, and join the Locked On Cougars Everydayer Club. All right, let's check out what's going on when it comes to the BYU football program. Now, the Parker Kingston situation is one that's very, very interesting and obviously has a lot of interest in it. And I understand what the interest is, because all of us are looking at it through the prism of, okay, this alleged incident, and let me be very clear right up front, Parker Kingston maintains the assumption of innocent until proven guilty, because that's the American legal system is set up that way. But he has been charged with felony rape stemming from an incident that stretches back to February of 2025. So a year ago, around this time, is when this alleged incident went down. Now, a lot of people, and it's been mainly opposing fan bases, but there have been some Cougar fans out there as well who have essentially kind of brought up the topic of, okay, how did BYU not know about this for almost a year? And how did it get swallowed up? How did it get buried? Was it a cover up? All the different things that seem to come up when stuff like this happens at BYU. And I understand why it exists, because let's be very clear. BYU is a university that's owned and operated by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It has an honor code that's quite stringent. It requires its students and student athletes, in this case in Parker Kingston, to abide by a standard of living that obviously stands out from a lot of what the rest of the college, I guess, scene has in it. But it's a very interesting dichotomy here, because the Salt Lake Tribune went and did a lot of research on this. And there's Courtney Tanner from the Salt Lake Tribune wrote this story, and that the BYU situation, in terms of who knew what and when they knew it, was because this incident allegedly occurred down in St. George, Utah last year. It was in a completely different jurisdiction. It didn't happen at BYU. It didn't happen on BYU campus. So therefore, according to what the Salt Lake Tribune is reporting here, the reason why BYU and their coaches, university officials, all the like, had no idea of what happened is because this was being investigated by St. George police and not BYU police, Provo police, or anybody in and around where BYU is located. It was hundreds of miles to the southwest. And that is where it kind of brought in the dichotomy of, okay, well, this is a pretty horrific situation. And how did BYU not know? Well, simply because they didn't want BYU to be tipped off to this. They didn't want Parker Kingston to be tipped off to this, because they were doing as thorough an investigation as they possibly could do. Now, There was a court hearing earlier this week with Parker Kingston and his legal representation. They have actually asked for an expedited preliminary hearing to actually be moved up to next month. It was really slated for April, but they have said, hey, we're ready to go and get this thing going. And it's actually going to take place. There'll be a hearing on March 18th. And then the preliminary hearing is currently slated to be held on March 23rd. And then at that point, he can be bound over for a trial in the incident here. So the whole thing about what I'm breaking down here for you guys is to understand that while your favorite fan base out there, whether you are a BYU fan or otherwise, BYU didn't know. And the coaches didn't know. And surely, I think, had they known, they would have taken action long before this went down. Parker Kingston is really the only person who can tell anybody why he did what he did. More importantly, why he held this to himself. Because according to this, the BYU Police Department, they did learn about the allegations against Parker Kingston in November of last year, the week, I believe, November 24th, which is when BYU was getting ready to play UCF in the regular season finale. But the reason why this was not passed along to BYU administration is that because the alleged crime, this is right here, S. Daniel Carter, the president of Safe Campuses LLC, says the alleged crime occurred in a private residence in St. George. Therefore, there was no requirement for any internal university reporting statistics or timely warning or Title IX response, unquote. It happened out of the jurisdiction. It didn't affect the greater campus community. So therefore, that's why it was essentially kept with BYU police. Now, they did serve a warrant to get the cell phone from Parker Kingston in November, but then it says the BYU Police Department was ultimately restricted by state law governing the sharing of information in an active investigation by another agency. This is not BYU police trying to cover for Parker Kingston. It's not BYU trying to cover for him either. It is literal state of Utah law. It's on the books that they were helping out with the investigation that St. George police were conducting, and that's where it stopped. There was no taking it to Kalani Sitake. Maybe could they have done that? Sure, but they'd be literally breaking the law had they done that. So that is why BYU, I think, as swiftly as they acted, well, they acted swiftly because at that point, there was almost a year into this investigation. He's obviously had been arrested at that point because the BYU police and Provo police were asked to apprehend him. He's now facing felony charges, and it's really blown up. And he's obviously been dismissed from BYU. He's also been dismissed from the BYU football program. And now we await the trial process and to see how this legal process plays out. So a lot of people want to claim that they know what's going down and what's what and how things went down and who knew. And you know what? Facts are facts. And I appreciate the way that Courtney Tanner and the Salt Lake Tribune approached this. They just essentially went step by step. Okay, here's why BYU police, it stops with BYU police. It says, they have a part here, when did BYU police get involved? It said in November of 2025. It says BYU police spokesperson Karen Ellingson specified on November 24th, at the time St. George police wanted to serve a warrant to seize a cell phone belonging to Kingston and asked BYU police for help. Officers collected and delivered the phone to St. George police, and that was where that stopped at that point. Then obviously come just a while back here in the month of February, then they serve a warrant to arrest him. That was obviously served by Provo police. He's taken into custody, and now we are gearing up for a trial to play out here, and we'll see what happens. I appreciate the fact, like I said, that the Tribune kind of just went, like I said, step by step and kind of laid out here what happened. There's no nefarious stuff going on with BYU. This is not BYU trying to cover for a star athlete because that's just not BYU style. I'll be very blunt. BYU is a university that obviously, being affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they had their druthers. They want nothing to do with anything of this variety, nor should they, nor should anybody, quite honestly. It's horrific stuff. But the situation is that BYU and BYU police did exactly as they essentially were bound to do by state law. So I appreciate the fact that BYU police, which have found themselves in hot water at different points in the not too distant past, they did things by the book and according to the book. And now it appears we'll find out what the ultimate outcome is in due process, because obviously the trial will play out, and we'll see what Parker Kingston, what the jury of his peers ultimately determine whether he's guilty or not. But this is a very, very interesting, touchy, and quite honestly, just a sad topic. But I also at the same time appreciate the fact that the Salt Lake Tribune took the time, very methodically went through this and just kind of laid out exactly what you should expect and can expect as a BYU fan. I know that the Tribune can obviously have a bad rap among BYU fans because of some of the stuff they've written in the past, but in this case, they nailed it. Credit to them, because they did the work. They went out and did legit reporting on this, and it'll be very interesting to see ultimately where this plays out. But props. Got to say, just props to Courtney Tanner, the Salt Lake Tribune, for doing what they did here, because I think it really lays out exactly what happened. And people I've talked to about the situation, BYU legitimately had no clue. And like I said, Parker Kingston, he is really the only one that can, if asked, I'm sure, I don't know, I can't speak for him, but he'd be the only one asked to explain why he didn't take it to his coaches or take it to BYU administration. He held on to it himself, was trying to deal with it himself, apparently, and now we're at where we're at, and obviously we'll find out whether he's guilty or not guilty, and then obviously things will move forward from there. But once again, this is very, very good reporting from the Salt Lake Tribune, and kind of lays out exactly, BYU, by and large, in terms of the BYU's coaches, there was nothing nefarious. They weren't trying to cover up anything because they didn't know. Flat out. They had no idea until recently, and obviously took very, I think, direct and deliberate action as soon as they were obviously in on knowing what exactly happened with Parker Kingston. All right, so there you go. Hopefully that makes sense. I would encourage you guys, go to sltrib.com and read the story. Like I said, it's very straight out. It's not slanted in one side or the other in terms of its reporting. It's right down the line reporting, and I appreciate the way that the Salt Lake Tribune handled this situation. All right, we are going to finish up today's show with another question heading into BYU's spring camp. It begins this afternoon formally out there at the Student Athlete Building. I, along with other media members, will be out there. We'll have, obviously, our reports for you guys coming in due time, but there is one part of spring ball that I always have to caution against every single year, and those are what we call spring all-stars. Today's show is brought to you by a new friend of ours, Coast, and Coast Pay is giving Locked On college listeners up to $2,000 in credit for your business when you get started today. If you manage a crew, whether it's in construction, HVAC, landscaping, any operation with trucks on the road, you already know how messy gas and materials spending can get. Cards get shared, receipts disappear, and month end turns into a headache as you try to figure it out. Coast Pay fixes all of that. They are the modern fuel card and expense management tool built specifically for fleets. Fuel, maintenance, materials, all in one card with real control and instant visibility. Every transaction shows up the moment it happens. No surprises. If someone fuels up at an odd time or tries to buy something outside their limit, you know instantly in that moment. Real-time alerts, you always know who's spending what and where. Automatic receipt capture makes month-end simple. Fraud protection with employee check-ins by text, no shared pins, and works everywhere Visa is accepted. No detours to specific stations to obviously get gassed up. Right now, CoastPay is offering our listeners up to $2,000 credit when you get started at coastpay.com/lockedoncollege. Go to coastpay.com/lockedoncollege. See how you can earn up to $2,000 credit. Terms apply. The Coast Visa commercial credit card is issued by Celtic Bank. All accounts are subject to credit approval. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at Woodward. We're just going to say it. The fun per foot ratio at Woodward Park City is second to none. If you want to get on the slopes, we're getting kind of late in the season, but there's still an opportunity for you to get out there. Located just 20 minutes from the Salt Lake Valley, Woodward offers experiential learning in a radically fun and safe environment. The best part is they have their winter mountain park passes, all access memberships. They've got an answer for any one of you, whatever you're trying to do, whether you want to bounce from parks to tramps to going outside and getting in on the terrain park. It's all available to you from our friends over at Woodward. Simply put, is the easiest place in Utah to learn and experience your first time skiing and snowboarding. Vehicle parking close to the mountain, easy walking access to the facilities, the rental shop, lifts that feature perfect terrain to learn on. It's true, they're just not all big jumps and rails, because I think Woodward has that rep, but enjoy a warm or cold beverage in the hub with a bite of food after your session. Can you say happy campers across the board. They've got all of the options available to you now. Once again, just 20 minutes from Salt Lake. Woodward offers that experiential learning capability with facilities for all abilities. Learn more now at woodwardparkcity.com. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And if you have not subscribed, rated, reviewed, shared this with your family and friends, please do so. Please encourage them to check out what we call the original, because it is the original daily podcast focused on all things BYU, and truly do appreciate all of your patronage and support. All right, so let's talk about what's going on with BYU football as you head into spring camp. And this happens, I mean, every year. Like I said, I've been covering BYU football on a professional basis for a decade and a half at this point. It's technically my 14th year covering BYU in a professional setting, I guess I should say, working in radio and doing the podcast like I do. And I can tell you without a doubt, every single one of those years I've been out at spring camp, what I like to lovingly call a spring all-star or two or three seem to emerge. And what I mean by that is, yes, there are obviously guys who are going to come out of spring camp having made themselves household names, but there will also be guys that will make themselves a household name over the next month in the 15 practices that BYU will participate in that you will, in some cases, literally never hear from again. There was a running back, and I can't remember how many years ago it is now. It was probably 5 at least, maybe as many as 7 or 8 years ago. There was a running back, and I'm telling you, every spring camp practice we were at that year, he was just lighting it up, just running through dudes, looked like he was going to be an absolute force for the BYU football program, and quite literally come training camp that summer. So we're talking, you get through spring camp, it's done by the end of March, and then come training camp at the end of July. So just like 3-4 months later, he wasn't even on the roster. And I don't think I ever heard his name pop up in BYU circles ever again. And I said, I wish I could remember the name off the top of my head, but when you deal with the hundreds of names that I've cycled through in my, I guess, a decade and a half covering BYU football, it's hard to remember all of them. But this will be the interesting part about this is there is going to be a player or two, it feels like, coming out of this spring camp period that are going to be, hey, did you hear about this guy? All this stuff, and we'll report on it in the media. And it quite literally could end up being that they don't even play another down or ever play a down in a real game for the BYU football program. It's kind of a unique dynamic, and I'm not trying to say it's a bad thing, because these are young men who are trying to make it. In many cases, these, I call them the spring all-stars, they're walk-ons, and they're guys who are trying to literally live the dream they have had since childhood to go out there and call themselves a BYU football player. That I respect it wholeheartedly. And like I said, it's cool to see guys live their dream. And I think the ultimate one of those, again, it worked out for him, is what Tanner Wall ended up doing. Tanner Wall had scholarship opportunities at other schools, but he was so dead set on being a BYU Cougar that he bypassed scholarship opportunities, paid his own way for multiple years, including, by the way, Tanner wasn't on scholarship until well after he was a starting caliber safety for the BYU football program. And he did it essentially for the love of the game. And that's so, like I said, there's always a story of Tanner Wall where it works out for him and they end up becoming, in his case, a first team all Big 12 conference safety. Those are incredible stories. But there's also guys who, like I said, this spring, who are going to go out there, give it their all, and will never don a BYU jersey once again, potentially, after this camp wraps up. And it's kind of crazy, but that's the nature of college football, especially in this day and age. Roster cutdowns have come. They're now at 105-man rosters when previously they were 123. You can have up to 105 scholarships. So walk-ons is a kind of a dinosaur term in many respects, because honestly, how many walk-ons are ever really going to be going forward for Division I/Power 4 programs? Very few, but it's welcome to the changing of the guard when it comes to college football. But I'm looking forward to being out there at spring camp, and I do look forward to seeing which player or players make themselves a household name. And I sincerely hope that we get one or two of those guys who end up being a Tanner Wall type impact player versus guys, like I said, who you never, ever hear from again when it comes to BYU sports. All right, that is going to do it for today's edition of the show. I hope this all worked out, because I have had some massive difficulties on the back end. I think if you're watching on YouTube, you've kind of seen me kind of like scrambling a bit on the back end here, but I think we got through this. So truthfully, I appreciate all of your guys' support of this podcast. Fingers crossed that, when I push stop recording, that it all does what it's supposed to do and we'll have a full podcast for you. But hey, if I don't, maybe we'll have to re-record. But nonetheless, as always, thank you for your support of this podcast. Thank you for making it your first listen of the day. For watching this on YouTube, we're going to send you over to the first ever 24/7 Locked On Network YouTube channel for more Locked On content there. Or if you're listening to this in the audio format, go make your second listen of the day. Our friends over at Locked On College Basketball. Get ready for March Madness with your daily podcast focused on all things college hoop. It's a great product that they're putting out, so check that out as well. And as always, come back and be an everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.